Movie House Cinemas, proud sponsors of Conversations with Gerry Kelly. Treat yourself to a movie. Relax in VIP recliner seating without the VIP price tag. At Cityside, Glengormley, Mackara and Coleraine. Enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome to Conversations with me, Gerry Kelly. My guest tonight was born in Belfast, raised in Strabane, and he's now universally acclaimed as one of the most gifted and influential songwriters Ireland has produced over the past 50 years or so. Paul Brady has written songs that became anthems. He's collaborated with the likes of Bob Dylan and Bonnie Raitt, and he's inspired generations with his lyrics and musical craftsmanship. Paul, it's an absolute delight to see you again, and thank you for being my guest.
Well, nice to see you again, Gerry.
You've been at this a long while, haven't you?
I was just thinking there before this, it's actually 60 years since I stood on a stage in a semi-professional status when I was supposed to be studying at UCD.
I'm going to get to that.
In the 60s. I was in a series of sort of soul and rhythm and blues bands from about 65 through to 67, and then I went professional then with the Johnstons.
You've written some memorable songs, not just for yourself, because the likes of Bonnie Raitt, Cher, Phil Collins, Bob, they've all recorded some of your stuff, which begs the question, why are you still living in Ireland and not living the high life in LA or New York or something?
Well, by all accounts, living in LA is not that high life. Well, I don't know. I like Ireland. I live in Dublin. I've lived there since I came back from the States in 1974. I've lived in Dublin, and I like it there. Yeah.
It always struck me that you're more interested in your craft than you are in fame. Would that be true?
Yeah, I've never felt comfortable in the fame stakes at all. You know, I mean, I'm not a rock star, you know, and I never set out to be. I was just obsessed with music from a very young age. Music was my best friend in a way. I was a bit of a loner, I suppose, as a child, and I kind of lost myself in music. And as I grew older, my tastes and fluency in various different styles expanded. And suddenly I felt like I wanted to be a full-time musician. Right. And that's how
You've never been the one for the red carpets and the openings of this and the premieres of that.
I don't mind an old pat in the back once in a while, you know. But it's not really why I'm in it, you know. I think, who was it said that fame is the sum of people's misunderstandings about someone?
Well, I'm going to give you a pat in the back, not just from me. Here's a quote from Bob Dylan.
Right.
Bob Dylan says, people get too famous too fast these days and destroys them. Some guys got it down. People like Leonard Cohen, Lou Reed and Paul Brady. Secret heroes. It's not bad from Bob Dylan.
Yeah, well, that was a nice surprise, I must say.
How did you meet Dylan, or how did he meet you?
Well, again, this was in the sort of mid to late 80s. I got a call from my agent to say that Dylan's management. Dylan came to Europe on a big tour. He was promoting a box set of his at the time called Biograph, with about 6 or 7 albums in it. And I got the call to go and meet him in Wembley because he was playing there.
Why did he ask for you specifically?
Well, as opposed to
anybody else.
Well, I mean, because he had been listening to what I was doing. He loved the album that Andy and I did together, and he was introduced to that by a mutual friend called Happy Traum, the late Happy Traum, who was a friend of Dylan's in the village in the 60s. And you know, Dylan lived up in Woodstock, and he would call in on Happy on his way up every so often and say, "What are you listening to?" You know, and Happy gave him this album. So he fell in love with Arthur McBride, my version of it, and he actually recorded it himself in the mid-90s on his own album. And he just wanted to meet and see how I tuned my guitar and stuff like that, and how I did what I did. And
he was very curious about how you tuned the guitar. Why were you so different? Why could he not manage what you were doing?
Well, I mean, I always used a variety of tunings. I mean, from Joni Mitchell on, I was a big fan of Joni Mitchell's when she first came out. And she used a lot of open tunings, and I started to get into that. And I just found it made the guitar sound different, and it threw you in certain different ways musically. And, I wasn't the only one doing it, but it was a rare enough thing, and Dylan was interested in how it worked. And
wasn't he interested in your version of the Lakes of Pontchartrain?
Yeah, well, he actually recorded that too.
Yes, he did.
And another song he did live that I had done called Mary and the Soldier from the album with Andy, yeah.
Where did all this musical talent of yours come from? Because your mum and dad, they were teachers.
Yeah.
But they weren't particularly musical, although your dad was a bit of a showman.
Yeah. Well, my dad was I guess more of an actor than a singer, but he sang well. He had a nice tenor voice, in the sort of Irish tenor style, and but his main thing was acting, and in his earlier years he produced a lot of shows in Strabane, reviews and things, and did one-man shows himself, and when we would go to holidays in Bundoran in the summertime, because they had long holidays as teachers, he would be well known in the various establishments and to do a turn, and he would destroy a place. I mean, he'd had them all blubbering,
really?
Just himself. And I watched this as a child, and I was just totally blown away by it. And I guess there's an element of that in what I do, insofar as when I perform some of the songs I've written, I'm kind of acting out a role as I'm doing it.
Yes,
I got that from him.
From your dad.
Yeah, and my mother was very musical too. She played a bit of piano and she liked to sing,
Well, you were packed off to St. Columns and Derry.
Yeah.
As a boarder.
Yeah.
Initially, that wasn't a very pleasant experience, was it?
Well, it was 14 miles away, for God's sake. Half the town was going up on the bus from Strabane. And
but you were boarding.
I was boarding and never quite got an answer for that, beyond the fact that, well, we thought we didn't want you to be distracted by things. We wanted you to concentrate on your studies.
And how was that experience, and how student type were you?
I wasn't really a kind of student, I mean, I did okay in my O-levels, my A-levels, but when I went to college in Dublin, my first question was, what am I doing here?
What were you supposed to be doing at UCD?
I was doing an arts degree, the daughter's degree, we used to call it. French and Irish and archaeology and, bit of that.
And?
I just, within about 2 months of me being in Dublin, I'd never been in Dublin before, by the way. I mean, the furthest I'd ever been away from home when I was 17 was Ballymote in County Sligo, where my great grandaunts lived, I'd never had been to Belfast, very rarely to Derry. And when I came down to Dublin, it was my first time in the capital city. But within 2 months, I realised that I wasn't meant to be at this college, and I started figuring out the music in the town. And
So was that the first time music entered your head? Had you?
I know. I had been. I had been. No, I hadn't been doing any performance. I did a bit of work in the Holyrood Hotel, Bundoran,
right.
Entertaining summer tourists,
just playing the guitar and singing.
This would have been 62, 61, 62. I was only a young teenager.
But I'm sure in those days you were only covering what was top of the pops at the time.
Yeah.
There was no traditional Irish music in you at this stage.
Well, no, the Clancy brothers had just come online, had just come out. So there was the beginning of the ballads and Fine Girl Yar and all that sort of stuff.
Yes.
So it was beginning to move in that direction in the early 60s. And it was as new to me as it was to the rest of Ireland, because nobody had heard of the Clancy brothers. They were over in America until they became famous.
Yeah.
So I started to learn some of the ballads, but mostly it was the pop music of the day. I was a fan of Chuck Berry.
Oh, you played in groups. Now, and you see the Inmates.
The Inmates, yeah.
The Cult.
Yeah, with a K.
With a K. The Roots Group. with a double O in roots and in group and a Z in the middle,
Yeah.
and Rock House.
Yeah.
What kind of stuff were you doing with them?
Rhythm and blues. I was doing covers actually of Tina Turner stuff at the time. Ike and Tina Turner, and Ray Charles, and Chuck Berry, and I was just doing, the more bluesy, rocky end of pop music. I was more interested in.
But you weren't writing anything at this stage, really?
No.
This was all just performing.
Yeah.
And you were having a great time down in Dublin? It all sort of came to a halt?
Well, I wasn't having a great time because I actually felt extremely guilty that I wasn't doing any study.
Yes.
And as the months went on and came into years, I was spending less and less time at the college. And eventually a letter comes home to me in Strabane from the registrar at UCD, more or less saying, "Paul Brady, where are you? Where have you been all these 3 years?" And so that kind of brought things to a head. But
your mum and dad saw this letter?
they saw this letter, and they came down to Dublin and mortified me. I was sitting with a bunch of cool friends in the basement of Switzer's, which was the cool place to be. And I see my mother and father walking in, going,
Hold you out?
I know, I was hauled out and sent back. I spent another year pretending to be at UCD, and I was then invited. Then I started playing the ballads around Dublin because I left the rhythm and blues bands and I picked up an acoustic guitar and I started singing folk music because folk music was starting in Dublin. Folk groups, clubs were springing up all over the city. It was the start of the big ballad boom, and I got caught up in that. And then eventually I started opening for bands like the Johnstons, who were countrywide famous, and then they asked me to join. So in 1967 I joined the Johnstons, and that was me pro.
And how were you in the eyes of your mum and dad at that stage? He's
Well,
got a job, he's earning money.
Well, it was, yeah. You see, the Johnstons had just had a #1 hit with the Ewan MacColl song, The Travelling People.
Yeah.
So, and they were on television. So that kind of softened the blow a wee bit for the mother, when she saw that the son was getting on television.
On television.
That, well, maybe this is not as stupid as we thought, So she softened her attitude to it was always like you have to have something to fall back on.
Yes, of course.
And nobody wants to be told they're going to fall back when they're a teenager. They want to be falling forward.
It was a great accolade to be asked to join the Johnsons.
Well, it was, absolutely, yeah.
And you went out, you lived in America?
Well, we went to England first in January '69 for about 3 years, and then we went to America, and it went a bit pear-shaped there for a variety of reasons, not unconnected with the first big fuel crisis in the world. Record companies found it hard to get vinyl, it was much more expensive. So basically they started not signing new acts, and not only that, dropping acts they already had. So it was a wrong time for us to try and get a record deal in America. Yeah.
So when you come back, what, mid-70s, early 70s?
It's 1974.
74.
The band had split up, and I was kind of foostering around New York, not knowing what I was doing with myself. I wasn't quite sure how legal I was or not, And
you wouldn't have been today now under Mr. Trump. So.
No, exactly. But eventually I got a letter from Liam O'Flynn, God rest him, the piper in Planksty, to say that Christy Moore was leaving the band, and would I come and join the band? And would I what? I mean, I was out the door like a shot,
You didn't stay that long with Planksty, but the experience in that, and you met Andy, of course, there. The experience of that must have been huge for you.
Well, it was huge. We were playing all over Europe to big crowds, and I was learning an awful lot of music. A lot of it was new to me. I was finding a voice in traditional song and folk music, a different kind of voice to the voice I'd had when I was singing blues.
Yeah.
So I discovered then that there were a number of rooms inside me which were totally different, and I could go into at will every so often and play with the toys in that room, And
did this come as a surprise to you that you had that capability?
Sort of, yes, because it wasn't stuck in front of my face as graphically as that. But I knew when I was a child that there wasn't any music that sounded strange to me. I had I was roughly fluent in lots of different ways, different styles of music from a very early age. Yeah.
But when did the songwriting take over?
Well, that was later in the 70s. I spent the large part of the 70s in traditional music, and I made the album with Andy Irvine.
Yes.
And then a couple of years after that, I did an album of my own, solo, called Welcome Here, Kind Stranger. And after that, I remember driving along one day in the car, and I had the radio on, and I heard this song, Baker Street, coming on the radio. Gerry Rafferty.
Gerry Rafferty.
And I had to pull the car over and listen to this. This was fantastic, because I knew Gerry Rafferty, because he was in the British folk scene when the Johnstons were living in London, and he had a band at the time called the Humble Bums. Yes. Among the members were Billy Connolly and Tom Harvey. So I knew Gerry. I'd met him at various folk festivals. I knew he was writing songs, but I hadn't heard anything the calibre of Baker Street coming out of the radio. And I suddenly, almost overnight, said to myself, Paul, you would love to see if you could write songs, and now's the time to start. So in 1979, I kind of turned my back on my whole traditional thing.
On the whole acoustic thing?
Yeah. And started to write. And a year later, I had 8 or 9 songs, which became an album called Hard Station. And that was my first ever album of my own songs.
All your own stuff.
Yeah.
You went electric then as well. You had the
keyboards
and all.
I had a band and drums and bass.
Almost full orchestration as well.
Yeah.
Dylan had done that. Go back to Dylan. He had done that 20 years ago.
Yeah.
A bit of a stir. Did you have any reaction towards?
Well, there were a few people sort of make, the Dylan at Newport's kind of slag, and because a lot of people were surprised by my first album of my own songs. A lot of people in the media, although my audience is over the country, when I was, from 78 through to 80, when I would be doing solo shows, I'd be gradually introducing a song. There's a song I wrote last night, that might have been Crazy Dreams, called a different name or something, not finished.
Yes.
So my audience knew I was writing songs long before the general kind of media picked up on it. So they weren't surprised when Hard Station came out. But a lot of the people in the media were, yeah.
And a lot of big names heard your music.
Well, yeah,
Tina Turner.
Yeah, Tina Turner, and
how did that come about?
Well, I was being managed at the time by a company in London called Damage Management, and the leader of that company, Ed Bicknell, was friendly with Roger Davies, who was an Australian who managed Olivia Newton-John at the time, and she was a big international star. Roger Davies took over Tina Turner because Tina was at the bottom end of a long slide in popularity throughout the 70s with her husband Ike.
Oh, yes.
And she split up with him, and Roger Davies decided that Tina Turner was much bigger, should have been much bigger than she was. So he took over Tina Turner. He was out at dinner one night with my manager saying, look, I've taken over Tina. We want to make an album. Does any of your artists have any songs? Now, they already had Mark Knopfler's song, Private Dancer, which became the album title. But Ed gave him my song, Steel Claw, from my second album, True For You. And he took that and played it to Tina, and she loved the song. And there was a few little changes they asked for, like I mentioned Benidorm in the song, and they sort of said we don't nobody in America knows where Benidorm is. Can we make it about San Francisco?
Yeah.
And I said sure, whatever. So that was my first introduction to Tina Turner. And
did you meet her?
Oh yeah, I did.
Did you perform with her?
I danced with Tina Turner on her 50th birthday.
Really?
At her party in London, yeah. Oh yeah.
What's it like listening to other artists interpret your songs?
Well, it's very educational in a way, because some of them take it in a totally different direction that surprises you,
And does that hurt?
Well, I wouldn't go so far as to say hurt, but but once or twice you might say, oh, you know,
That's not what I wrote it for.
Yeah,
That's not what I wrote it for.
but no, I've been very lucky. I don't know. I've had thick on 100 covers of songs of mine, you know, and the vast majority of them I love. And
Bonnie Raitt, tell me a little bit about Bonnie Raitt and your association with.
well, Bonnie, I was a fan of Bonnie Raitt's from the very first time the Johnstons went to America in 1971. I bought her first album, an album called, I think it was called Give It Up, and I loved her. And then we opened for her in Tufts College outside Boston at a gig. The Johnstons were her opening act, and that's where I met her. And you know, I loved her music, and she her bass player Hutchinson was a big fan of Irish music at the time, and he was into sort of Planxty and the Bothy Band and all that stuff from the 70s. And he picked up on my stuff and played it to Bonnie. And I sent her a demo of a song called Not the Only One, which I had on my second album. And she recorded that and had a big hit with it. And that's how we came together, yeah.
Of all that you've done, looking back on all the years, you said, 60 odd years you've been at this.
Yeah.
What are the highlights for you? What do you think? I'm satisfied with that. I'm happy with that.
Oh. Well, I you know.
I mean, Paul, you have halls of fame coming out of your ears. you have accolades, you have awards, you have doctorates from various universities.
Yeah.
You've done it all.
Well, I mean, you know, there were a few downsides in my life, you know, in terms of the way the Johnston split up wasn't pleasant, and none of that stuff is, you know, but I've been very fortunate, very lucky. A lot of what's happened to me happened by accident, you know. Things just happened, and there's no reason why they happened other than an accident, and I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, and that was that's how a lot of stuff happened for me. Yeah.
But you've kept your feet on the ground very, very easily. You don't see yourself as a star.
No.
Why? Look at what you've done, Paul.
I know, but I mean, I don't want to be a star.
You don't want to be?
No.
Are you a bit of a loner?
Might be, yeah. I might be.
You're a bit reluctant to say that.
Well, nobody likes to be thought of as a loner, but.
Well, I mean, maybe, you know, maybe a loner is the wrong word. But you're not the most. Go on. I'm not going to put the words in your mouth.
I'm a bit of a lone wolf. All right.
Yeah, lone wolf. That's better.
I mean, because I never felt like I wanted to be co-opted into any scene, a folk scene or an R&B scene or any kind of pop scene or anything. I just wanted to dance between them all.
But isn't that why you're so hard to sell?
Yeah.
Because you're in so many genres.
I mean,
you're not a pop star, you're not a folk star. Well, you are all those things.
Yeah.
But PR people like one thing to sell.
Yeah, well, it wasn't easy for people trying to sell me, you know. So, but you know, I'm very happy with what happened to me, you know. I mean,
of course, you're very happy. Even today, Paul, you're still selling out concerts no matter where you go. Is it a nostalgia trip for people, or are the young people now finding Paul Brady?
I think it's a bit of all that, you know. I mean, some of them are there, like I would meet them maybe signing a few things after, and they'd say, well, you know, the first time we saw you was 50 years ago in Oma, you know, or something like that. And you know that they are reliving their own time, their youth, you know, and that's fine. And then others bring along their kids in their 20s, because when their kids were babies, their parents were listening to stuff that I was doing, you know, Andy Irvine and me and my own records and stuff. So, I mean, I can't really explain why these places are doing so well, selling out, but I'm not complaining.
Because you're a brilliant songwriter and you've written some of the most phenomenal songs. Are you easing off in performances nowadays, or what?
I am a wee bit, yes. Yeah, I mean, I'm not I'm not really interested in long tours anymore. You know, I mean, I sort of, I suppose I have reached the ceiling in America, which I don't particularly want to expand any further, and I don't particularly feel dying to go back to America at the moment. You know, and I'm enjoying very much still. I have a trio I'm working with now, Bill Shanley and Trevor Knight. We're only on our third gig tomorrow in Belfast, and so that's exciting, you know.
And you're still writing away, are you?
I'm writing away. Yeah, recently collaborated a bit with Paul Muldoon.
Oh, excellent.
Which certainly
it's different.
It certainly took me in different directions. Yeah, and that's been fun. Yeah.
Paul, thank you so much for being my guest. I'm looking forward to see what you and Muldoon come up with in the years and months ahead. Paul, thank you very much.
Thank you, Gerry. It's a pleasure talking to you.